they would say things like, God gives people set lives. God said I had to be a victim of sexual assault over and over. I didn't even know it was happening because of how normal it felt. There was no non-abusive days. Chronic unknown sprains in ankles, chronic unknown sprains in wrists, chronic headaches and contortions and neck soreness from being beat.
I'm here to share with you an episode about Obscurity. It's a very, very painful episode to listen to. They talk about a lot of graphic details in the episode as well, so be warned. But again, I think it's just one of those episodes I think is really important to reinforce the importance of childcare and looking out for the best interest of a child. So listen in, and please don't forget to drop a comment letting me know how you feel the episode. Why don't you start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where are you living right now?
I'm living in Minnesota currently. I just moved here. It's pretty good, honestly.
Okay, Minnesota. What is it like in Minnesota?
Really cold. Cold most of the year, but lately it's been a lot hotter, which is actually kind of unfortunate. I don't like cold a lot, but I like intermediate.
Right. Where are you originally from? What city?
Kind of around the United States, but mainly reside the most in Florida and Georgia.
Okay.
So mainly
All right,
Florida, yeah.
So how did you end up sort of like leaving life there? What was the reason for you leaving? Was it just like work related or your partner, or was it something deeper?
When I left, it was like 5 days after my 18th birthday. And I had gotten like a plane ticket from my partner kind of like secretively, and I just kind of just left. So I just left because like I wanted to leave, be free from that.
Right.
So
Leave your situation. Yeah.
yeah,
And so that means, yeah, it's basically directly related to sort of what had happened to you because, you'd gone
yes,
through this for 18 years and literally 5 days after that, you're like, I'm out of here. I just can't do this anymore. Yeah, that
exactly,
makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
So your story actually dates back to when you were very, very young, from your
Yep,
absolute earliest memory. Am I
yep,
correct? Yeah.
yes. And for that, I feel like it would date back before I was born with my family, like my siblings. So when I was born into that.
Right. Man, that's crazy to think. The intro talks a little bit about your story. You were what you'd call even trafficked by your own family. But before we get into that, I kind of would like you to sort of just tell our listeners what would you define as trafficking?
Trafficking is forced exploitation of another human. Most common with children. They're the more common type of trafficked person, but it's trafficking is it encapsulates a lot of different types of forms and things because there's the most common known about trafficking, which is commercial trafficking, and then the type where people think of, I guess you would say, there's commercial trafficking and there's labor trafficking, debt bondage trafficking, and my parents and people around me when I was growing up used kind of all the methods, and there's a lot of like different areas with that, but I found out specifically through a lot of research and therapy that I had been through specifically intrafamilial trafficking, which just means
Mm,
it is done by someone who is like a family member or a family member. So, and for me, it was my parents and older brother and complicit church members and bishops and stuff. So
yeah. So
it's
it's
just
like
forced
really home for you.
exploitation, and it can be exploitation of
Right.
any kind. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be. It can be like even as little as like humiliation, and you won't know what could be really going on. Like that was the small things for me, like that no one really you could see. I was just being humiliated and kind of ridiculed. It just looks like my mom bullies me, in public.
Mm, yeah. Um, So trafficking does not always mean that it is
Sorry, I did right now.
removing a
So
person from their home environment, putting them in or forcing them into another environment that is not home to them, where, abuse is happening, sexual abuse, physical abuse, labor abuse is occurring. So it's because I'd always initially thought that it meant the removal of someone from their home to another place where the abuse is actually occurring.
yeah,
But trafficking doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can even
yes,
be something that is happening within their own home environment.
no.
Am I right in saying that? Okay,
Yes, exactly.
interesting.
It actually is more common. It's more common in an intrafamilial way because it's the most underreported, but it is more commonly known as trafficking usually happens first intrafamilially, like a child will be sold or given by their parent to someone else, and that's actually the most typical form of trafficking. The more uncommon types are the more known about, which is like snatching a person off the street and taking them to an unknown location, and that is very serious, and that does happen.
Yeah. But if somebody were to ask you, like, how would you then kind of distinguish between like a home abusive situation versus trafficking? So why would you name yours trafficking versus a home
Yep.
abuse? Yeah.
I actually get asked that a few times, and I have actually researched the difference, and that's why there's an overlap with knowing that there's a higher rate of intrafamilial sex trafficking specifically, and the fact that it overlaps with when these types of cases get reported that are intrafamilial trafficking, they're often reported like by instance, by case, and like by what is going on directly, and it's not seen as like a whole. And I don't really feel like people could really see the dynamic with that because intrafamilial trafficking starts from typically like birth because it is typically the parents. So with that, the difference would be like these are reported as CSA cases. Like maybe the parents get reported for just like multiple CSA reports and abuse of the children, and then they get
Right.
charged with just CSA and harming a child, maybe even further things. But you wouldn't see the trafficking charge, which is more of a federal type crime because, and I didn't know that was what was happening. So for the difference for me was that it probably looked like a typical CSA case, a child being malnourished, neglected, and people could see that kind of, I bet. But what distinguished mine really, and what I realized that made me call it that instead of just abuse and torture, like kind of like I used to, was the intention and the memories I started having about how the intention was brought about. I always thought it was unintentional. And the things I remember now, it was basically and unfortunately a very planned event, and confirmed my own mother just a few years ago because I learned no contact only recently. So it was definitely intentional with the details I have and like the way my parents went about it. It was a chosen thing to have all the children and to abuse them. So for my parents, it was blatant in my space. I could see that whenever I finally realized it, even at home, I realized it a little bit older in my teenage years and was kind
Mm.
of rebelling against that. And I realized it then, but didn't know what to call it. And now when I look back, I they were enforcing and causing and allowing. Not it wasn't like just not knowing, like naivety or like the product of the time or like they couldn't have known. Like they
Right.
knew. We had it reported, we
Right.
counseled, but they never did anything, and it just
Right.
and just the details of my parents being complicit. It wasn't just like them allowing it. So that's what
Right.
distinguishes it for me. But on the outside, I have no clue how it looked. Honestly, I don't know what distinguishes me from a regular looking CSA case as a
Right.
child because I genuinely probably did come off as just like a maybe just an off kid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so I understand what you mean in the sense that it was like the whole thing from the very, very beginning was planned. It was like we're gonna plan to
Yep.
have kids so that we can do this and we can, as opposed to it being sort of like, yeah, a result of environment or result of a mental health sort of
Yeah.
situation. Right.
Yes,
Okay.
and that is also common with intrafamilial trafficking. Is it can be unintentional on maybe one parent's part, or maybe the parents don't know someone is doing it to their children that they're allowing to be around. And those are just
Awesome.
short, minor examples, but not minor. Like two examples. But
Right. Right.
for the case for me, it was my parents, and it was from birth, and it was from the firstborn child to the lastborn child. So,
And from what I remember reading about your story as well, it was 8 siblings, and this was inflicted on all 8 siblings as
yes.
well. How are your siblings doing now?
Um, I am no contact with mostly all of them. Um, because of
Mm,
a lot of factors,
yeah.
and because of a few of them are abusers of mine or are apologists of our parents, our shared parents. And I am in contact with three siblings.
Okay.
And one had passed away in 2016, so she died in between me before I moved out, like between that area. So
Yeah.
she died, and one of them is a lot older. She wasn't living in the home with me, but she experienced it previously when she grew up with my father. So
Right.
it is a little bit all over the place. But for right now, I am in contact with just three of my siblings, and I think it's as good as it really can be. I feel like we're building our relationships pretty good for what we went through. For a while, I
Mm.
feel like I actually didn't talk to two of them for a long time because I don't know, I really couldn't. So, yeah.
Why don't we begin with you just telling us a little bit about sort of where it begins for you and your earliest of memories and sharing your journey?
So I always like I've been having memories over the years as I go through therapy. So I'm never sure what the first memory will always be whenever I realize more memories, but I guess I feel like the first time I really felt like anything was like wrong, and I guess the first time I could have realized was I only ever have the ages or the dates completely correct because I can't fully recollect what age I was and what year it was. But
Mm.
I know I was like beyond the age of like 3, 4, whenever I was like conscious about something being wrong. And between the ages of
That's
like
really
up to 7, I was like thinking and displaying a lot of behaviors that were definitely a cause of that. It was so much. And I think the first memories I can currently recall was like actually literally telling my mom something was happening with my older brothers. And yeah, I think that was around like 6 or 7,
good.
maybe younger. I'm not sure, but it was around that time we had just I don't even think we had moved into our house. We had been homeless. So, yeah, it was a moment where I said, "Hey, Mom, I think my brother's doing something weird to me." And I said, they're doing something weird to me. And I didn't know what to call it. I'm basically a little bit older than a toddler.
Mm.
And she told me just like something along the lines of, I think it was, "You're misunderstanding. Like, nothing's really happening." Like, she just
Yeah.
reassured me and like basically like reassured, and I realize now it was obviously like a grooming mechanism tactic or
Mm.
whatever. So, but at that time I actually do remember feeling like, oh, I was very quiet. I was like very confused because I was like, I know something is not okay with this, but like my
Mm.
parents are telling me like there's nothing going on. So,
Right. So would you say that you're the main sort of perpetrators or the main abusers in your situation would be your brothers, your older brothers,
yeah,
or your
so
parents as well?
my parents I feel like are equally were just as abusive as my oldest brother and my brother, who's a step down from his age, and there's another sibling in between, but he is a step down. He also was completely also exactly abusive, the same, but I just put
Mm.
it at a different area. My parents are individual, as the main abusers who caused it all. Like obviously I know for a fact that, my brothers wouldn't even be alive if they didn't plan all of this. So I wouldn't have been through that because I wouldn't exist. And not even in like a
Mm.
self-deprecating or morbid way, because that's actually just kind of the truth. Like, they planned to have that happen, so it happened. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it started with like I just feel like I really don't know how to explain it actually.
Yeah. I can see that it's like kind of a little bit heavy for you right now to kind of share it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about
Yeah.
it a lot, so it's always on my mind, and I'm currently in therapy for a lot of things, so
Mm.
it's always on my brain, and I'm actually actively talking about it, so I don't get like too dysregulated, but
Yeah.
I actually really love to share it. I actually genuinely love talking about it. It really regulates me in some way.
Mm. Yeah. So what were some of the sort of abuse that you can recall that you experienced by the hands of your parents?
My parents, I would say emotional, physical abuse, sexual abuse, both of my parents. Me specifically, with both my parents. I don't know about my other siblings because I don't know what my parents did to them in that kind of way. I saw the physical abuse and the emotional, verbal, mental abuse, psychological, all that stuff, and torture, literal torture. Sorry, my
What
cat
do you
is
mean
literally
when
in
you
the
say
way.
torture? Yeah.
Torture differs from abuse in my opinion, and I was also abused, but I feel like torture it's like a psychological, I don't really know how to word it. It's
Oh, how did it
definitely a
manifest for
psychological
you?
conditioning. Yeah. My parents would do like daily like rituals of a certain type of pattern that would exist in the home. Like, so every morning was like chaotic with my mom. She would always be screaming the second we wake up, always like yelling at us for like, maybe we're not waking up right. We're not waking up on time, or maybe we wake up too early. I'm not sure. We're not getting dressed fast enough. She would leave us home. She would leave us at random places. Like anywhere we went, she would get not okay with like us being. So, those were psychological because if we were, not, perfect, we would be left somewhere, or not allowed to access things that children need to access, like schooling and going out of their house. Punishments were more like
trapping, like a trapment, like a literally just hostage. I feel like the abuse, specifically the physical abuse, I guess I could say, was a cycle of, like I mentioned, every morning my mom would be screaming about something, and every morning without fail, I'd be throwing something, hitting us again, like without fail, they would always be hitting us. And it was like a cycle of, or a loop, I guess I should say, of every day was exactly the same with the same thing. It was just a different thing every time. And it was like a creation of like no matter what you weren't doing or were doing, and nothing was really wrong with me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was being a kid. And she would just find something to be like
Mm.
obsessive about. And it wasn't like, you know, arguing with her child. It was like if I was caught for something she thought I was lying about, which I wasn't because I didn't lie as a kid, she would back me into a wall screaming, and I'd be, freaking out, and it would get physical pretty fast because
Mm.
I'm autistic, so I would hit myself, or I would scream and hold my head and I'd say stop, stop, stop. And this stuff happened really early on where she would just back me into an actual corner or a mental corner, and I'd be kind of just, how it depicts people just kind of like spiraling into their own body, but they're kind of just standing there, but they're probably freaking out on the outside, like screaming, hyperventilating, but just in one spot. And
Mm.
I feel like the physical stuff was just probably constant. I feel like I always felt like the mental and the yelling was more, but the more memories I have, it was a cyclic, just constant physical hitting us. Like
Right.
they said they gave up spanking. They only spanked for a bit, but my mom was punching me in the stomach, choking me against the wall, throwing me against things, like throwing objects at me, punching me in the head and
Mm.
kicking me, like days and days, like into middle school, high school, ever since and I didn't even go to most of my schooling. So it was the hardest whenever I was in high school, and it was just repetitive, and I had to go to school every day, and she'd punch me in the stomach before school, and I'd be like, gotta go to school. And yeah,
Mhm.
it was basically constant like that. And if that was that way for me, I don't really have memory of watching it happen to my siblings all the time because I dissociate a lot. But it was happening to them too. So it was just mainly, I feel like, physical the most. And the sexual abuse was very, I didn't even know it was happening because of how normal it felt. So
Yeah.
that I don't have a gauge on. It was every day. All of it was
Yeah.
every day. There was no non-abusive days.
Yeah. Would you say that your mom was more someone that you feared more and you experienced more abuse over your dad?
Feared more, yes. Feared more, definitely, yes. My mom was very much, I don't know if extrovert is the right word, but very loud about how she felt about things. My dad was actually pretty, from what I can remember so far, not really communicative. He didn't really speak much, but he was abusive in a lot of ways where it was physical and harsh and cold,
Mm.
and also the sexual abuse. So he, and it was mainly physical and harsh. And I just remember that the fear was mainly based for my mom. And with my dad, it was just known that he was not meant for comfort. It was given in my brain and all my siblings very young on that my mom would hold me and tell me after they would beat us. She would say things like, your father is meant to punish you in this way, and your mother is meant to nurture you. And then eventually she would change it to, your father's meant to punish you and your mother's meant to nurture you, but sometimes mom has to punish you too. And that is something I actually remember her saying verbally to me. And I actually remember the whole day that that happened. And it was just a lot to think about now that I know that they were fully just genuinely, like, just, I don't know, my dad was definitely hitting me and abusing me, but really the fear did come from my mom because I feel like whatever was happening was like a choice of both of their own. But my dad it was just a different kind of feeling because, he wasn't always there. He was mainly asleep on drugs. So it's a little
Right.
bit different.
Right. So the
Yeah.
situation, do you think that would you say that a lot of the abuse was happening when your dad was on drugs, when your mom was on some kind of on something, or was it more religious based? Like were they following a certain religious idea, or was it mental health related? What do you think were the causes?
All of the above. All of the above. Causes of the ability to let it fester and the ability to not change of their own volition is definitely brought on by people coddling and allowing that to stay there and not to call that out. So because of the cult practice and the religious aspects and because of their backgrounds and the abuse they went through, yeah, I'm sure that made it easier for them to just, you know, what they thought and told me growing up was, well, they said we were moving on from that and it was a generational problem and it was a generational curse. So I always thought we were like the end of the cycle. And not true, but I just
Mm.
realized that it was all factors. I
Yeah.
would never justify, but it is an explanation to say my parents both went through heavy abuse themselves, and
Mm.
when my parents both got to the point where they got together, it was immediate religious cult practice and whatever they had used in their previous tactics for getting by in life of being the people they were, and it
Yeah.
was immediate on their children. It was definitely immediate and planned because everything went so fast. It was so many children in such a short span. It was very much chosen,
Yeah.
but at the same time influenced. I feel like that actually had a lot to do with it. The church that we were, LDS church that we were going to, just them
Yeah.
as a whole, the practices and the ideologies of that
Yeah, I
religion
was just
as
about
a
to
whole.
ask, like, can you
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about the LDS? What are the beliefs? What are the ideologies? Why would you define this as a cult? Just for listeners that might have never heard of the LDS.
Yeah, so LDS just means Latter-day
Saints.
Saints. That's what
Yeah.
they call themselves. Church of Jesus Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is what their official name is. Mormons are what they were called. I'm not quite sure. I remember when they said to stop using that, but
Mm.
it was when I was still a member slightly. I think when I was a teenager, the one of the prophets or something made an announcement about they don't want to be referred to as Mormons and they shouldn't refer to them as Mormons. I guess they were trying to detach from the cult
Mm.
allegations,
Right.
but they have very
Right.
many allegations against them. So they were founded by, I should say, a man who was a known pedophile, Joseph Smith. And this is known.
Yeah.
This is known that he had multiple wives. He did polygamy, and was by
Mm.
force. And a bunch of his wives he met and married when they were children. The youngest one I believe he met was when he met her, she was 5 or 6 years old, and he married her when she was, you know, either an adult or a teenager. He married a lot of teenagers and a lot of women by force.
Mm.
So he was not a good guy, and that's the guy who started the religion. And it's seen as when you're in Mormonism, you are led to believe that it is not like a normal Christian belief. So that's why it's a little bit heavier, and people do believe Christian beliefs are pretty cultish too. And I can speak
Mm.
on that, and I cannot speak on that because I was a Christian, but I was a Mormon Christian.
Right.
So it was heavier in a way where we were taught that what was going on in our church was the only truth to be known, and I know other places are taught that too, but it was very indoctrinated that this is the only truth. Anything outside is literally the devil. Anybody telling you like anything about science, anything about like anything that's against anything anybody in this church says is the devil. Like that's the
Devil.
devil,
Mm.
and that's like just adversities coming at you like at the trial. So
Mm.
early on you get taught that like many things kids like display in like primary classes and then nursery, and they're having like I don't even know like normal child behaviors. Early on they would indoctrinate and bless children if they showed any signs of just anything. Like I remember getting blessings as a child for not acting right. Like they would give me blessings for like, my the way I acted. Like they do that a lot. They're very eugenics based, so they don't believe disabled people belong on Earth. They believe that disabled people are sent on Earth as like a trial to show other people as an example, and that when they go to heaven, that they are completely cured and they are normal, wonderful, healthy person. Like they weren't what they are, that
Mm.
horrible, awful body that God had to give them to give an example to the earth. Things like that.
Mm.
They also are based in racism. They believe baseline in their religion, in their script. It doesn't matter how much they try to change it. The original stuff they wrote in their books was that their tribes, that when the original tribes of the Book of Mormon
Mm.
is explaining, is the Second Testament. That's what the Book of Mormon is. It explains that basically just there's two tribes of people, and these were probably like guessing. I know all this, but it's just a generalization. I'm trying to say is like they were tribes, beginning tribes of like the foundation of civilization. So per se, in
Mm.
North America somehow and these people don't
North
exist.
America.
These tribes did not exist. They don't exist. These don't exist. This
Yeah.
is lies.
Yeah.
They gave them names too, like Nephites and Lamanites that did not exist, and they believe this fully. They believe this is real, like factual science and real people. And the Nephites and Lamanites were all white. They all had fair white skin. Everyone did on Earth
Yeah.
apparently back then. And the Lamanites were just not good people. They were hardened in their hearts, and they were just not of God. So God cursed their skin and made them black. And that is literally how they believe black people and people with brown, black skin, anything darker than white were created.
Is
That's
of
it.
the devil, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yes, exactly. And that's why for a while in their scripture, and now they've changed it to cover that up, they would say that black people couldn't get to heaven and they could not hold the priesthood. And yeah, and they also believed that if they did eventually, when they changed it, oh, they can go to heaven, but when they go to heaven, they'll be white. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Right.
and then on top of that, those are like they're based in racism, eugenics, definitely sexism, because women are controlled to get like a cult setting.
Mm.
Most Mormon families look pretty average, but like if you think of like controlling women in a misogynistic way, basically
Yeah.
trapped by a generational cycle of women being brainwashed into thinking like this is all normal. So even when they get out of it, maybe it doesn't look any different. So it's just a cycle of they're trapping women and people, and they
Right.
love to colonize. They colonized to begin with, and they colonize now. And the main
Mm.
part that I feel like is something that people don't know the most. Everybody knows about their racism and their scripture. Everybody knows about the sexism and the ritualistic practice and the cult practice, like the cult mannerisms and the stuff,
Yeah.
the hidden secrets and the embezzling of money and the cover-ups. But people don't really
Right.
realize they have really high rates of child sexual exploitation, child sex trafficking, and they have a very extremely high rate and seen evidence, but it's not going to be out there for anyone to see unless you find the right sources, because they don't want anyone to know that they are very commonly perpetrating and allowing incestuous trafficking and incestuous abuse amongst their members. It is probably actually, I believe, the most common abuse in the church is incestuous abuse amongst all families.
Do you reckon this is because like they kind of want to make sure that their people are pure breed in a sense, like that they're
Yes.
not bringing in too many people from the outside that are not pure LDS believers, kind of thing?
Yeah, they it's definitely like a brainwashing aspect and controlling of it's a generational thing. Obviously, there are generations of Mormons who have been generationally Mormon. Their family has been Mormon since their family knew the founder, like
Right,
that kind of stuff.
right.
So
Yeah.
those people exist today, and they are proud of the fact that their family comes from the founding like members. So these people are embedded, and these people speak on it so like profoundly that the people who are joining, maybe they're even converts, are just amazed,
Right.
and the emotions they pour out, it looks so very convincing.
Right. And they're like, oh, there's like a massive loyalty here that someone new joining
Oh.
in is able to see that, hey, like people that are coming in are staying in because obviously they're finding some kind of purpose in their own lives. And so,
Yeah.
you know,
It's a cycle of, I feel like, religious psychosis, honestly, for everyone in there. I
Right.
feel like they're all just kind of trapped in like feeling the unease, but praying and hoping and knowing that you're not supposed to get a sign, but thinking for a sign and asking for a sign is God letting you know that one day you'll be all right. And that's never going to happen when you're in that
Right.
setting.
And I guess also a lot of it is like, hey, when you die, you will be, you know, redeemed for all of the stuff that
Exactly.
you've done
A
on
lot of
Earth. So
them
it's like
actually
never gonna
don't really
experience it.
care.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of them actually are very apathetic, I feel, about
Yeah.
the world, because they actually speak on how they know that the world is sinful and disgusting, and like Mormons don't necessarily believe by default from birth you're sinful like some Christian religions. They believe that we are accountable and atonable for our sins as early as 7 years old, then you get baptized, 8 years old, 8 years old you get baptized, and that is when you are like sinful, like you now are accountable, and you can be sinful after 8 years old and you get baptized. So they very much embed that early on, that like you seek this feeling, you seek like this comfort, and like the loop is just that I honestly thought I was feeling comforted. Honestly, like if I look back when I was a child, I felt like a burning in my heart, and I would get up on the stand, and I would cry, and I would say like I believe in God and I believe in Jesus Christ, and I would say a testimony in front of the whole church, and I would sing songs about God, and I felt like it in my heart. And then my sibling who left deconstructed it and was like, yeah, but every religion, every culture feels that way about their religion. So who's to say that that's the right one? I was like,
Right.
you're kind of a little bit right. I was getting there. And eventually, yeah, it led into me realizing that they do trap people in a loop of they need mental health care, but they have LDS counselors. They need counseling, and actually the bishop is the main counselor. Bishops are never certified in any professional stance at all. They are just regular men in the Mormon church, getting qualified to counsel, talk to children about their sexual lives, talk to people about their sexual problems, talk to people about sexual exploitation going on with them, and allowing it to go on as long as they can get through it with God and pray through it. Yeah, so that was what happened with me. I went to the church about it. We went to the church about it. I specifically, I don't know if any of my siblings, but at eventually a point when I was a lot older, I did talk to them about it. We did talk to the church. We talked to the bishops, 2 separate bishops, about the sexual abuse that they were pretending went on at one point. And my brothers had harmed me a few times. So we were trying to get through that with the bishop, but they basically were now complicit because they knew and were aware
Right.
that I was being sexually abused by my family. And they just completely were like, just pray to God. Like, we don't need to take this legally because God, I guess God doesn't need legal advice, obviously. He's God.
And was it seen like, were you kind of being convinced that you were doing this and all of this abuse, and they would probably not call it abuse, but this sexual acts that are happening within the home is all being done in the name of God, and you are doing these things through God? Or was it, hey, yes, this is not good, but we have to support one another despite it not being well? So was it kind of being like promoted almost in a sense? What was the viewpoint? Like, how did they even justify this child abuse, the child sexual abuse? Like, what was the rationale behind why this is acceptable?
I feel like the main reason why they're pretty common with just in general with the church, but with these bishops specifically, with allowing these things to go on and just accepting it in that way and making it look like just a really bad thing that the family's going through, or something like a trial, or just something that the family just God predisposed them to needing to go through that. Like that was chosen before we came through the veil to go on earth. That's what Mormons believe, is that everything you are going to be and everything you are going to completely be before and after you die was decided before, and whatever you are, you chose. It is believed that you chose in heaven as a spirit, that I wanted that body, I wanted that life, and I know that's going to happen to me, and I'm okay with that. And I choose that because I'm going to be an example, or I'm going to be something, or that's going to do something, and I'm okay with that. So basically, they taught me in these events where I would talk to them about the abuse, is that it was just very much grooming. Like, it didn't look like they're like, oh, this is very unfortunate this is happening to you and your family. Like, we will try to work through this, and if this is really bad, then we'll take it legal. And they're supposed to be mandatory reporters, but I found out that legally things said in confessional settings do not have to be reported. So it was all around that. It was complicit, because when I would sit and talk to them about it, they would say things like, they would hear what I would say. I would say it blatantly, like something was going on, I was sexually abused, and they would say things like, well, sometimes God, well, not sometimes, but God gives people set lives, and we're just supposed to go through these things. So obviously, he was just telling me that God said I had to be a victim of sexual assault over and over, and my siblings, and that my parents were going to cause that, and that was just cool. Like, they actually did nothing further. I never got counseling for that. They did nothing further. It was like 2 little meetings, and then I was forced to have individual therapy with this male bishop about my own sexual compulsive problems and pornography addictions because of what I was going through. And it was not even a pornography addiction. It was I was a lesbian, and I liked girls, and I was attracted to girls, and they made me share. The bishop would make me share, like, what do you do when you feel this? Like, what do you do when you masturbate? Like, honestly, like, he was asking me explicit, disgusting details that he should not be asking a child. And the clerks and the bishops actually do ask these things to children routinely.
And to make things worse, it's like, why is it that certain kind of sexual acts are accepted and we just have to keep quiet about it? Like, hey, look, I'm having all of these sexual experiences that are happening in coercion, out of force, and I'm asking for help, and I'm seeking help, and I'm being told to keep quiet. But now when I'm engaging in it consensually by choice, well, now that is a sin. How does that work? Like, the irony of that is just so beyond me.
That's what I think just really was flipping a switch for me when I was a teenager.
Right.
I was like, how does that make any sense?
Right. I do want to go back a little bit to your situation with your family. You talked in quite a bit of detail about sort of what had been going down with your parents. How did your brothers sort of get into this? How did they also become abusers? And what was it that kind of led them to start doing this to you?
So
It started with my brother. He was the oldest sibling of the biological siblings, full biological.
Mm.
So he was born, and I'm not, I don't know every detail of why things could have happened that way and why he began being that type of person, but it is clear to say that my parents early on were neglectful of anything going on. And I do believe a lot of it was allowed and planned, even. I'm just not quite sure what parts with him because he comes 7 years before me. Details I know is that early on he was sexually abused by various outside parties, and I have no clue if it was my mother or father because I only know my own experience from the sexual abuse with my mother and father. I don't know. I did not see my parents sexually harm my siblings other than hitting us naked, which is still sexual harming, but that's the only form I
Mm.
remember is they would hit us on our bodies while we were stripped naked. So that is still sexual abuse.
Mm.
But that is the only form I could see. So other than that, my parents were most likely, in my opinion, when the older siblings were, because it's my oldest brother, then my other sibling that comes after that, and then two brothers after that, and then I'm the
Mm.
next.
And then
So
you.
my oldest brother, all of those siblings were years before me. I come 3 years after the one before me. So all of them were experiencing everything, a whole different thing in a whole different situation, but the same concepts in a whole different, like it was just so I can't begin to even explain it because I don't know it. I can't speak on
Mm.
what happened, but I do know that they allowed, and when they were aware that my brother was being sexually abused by neighbors and friends and other people in general, that
Mm.
they were not stopping it. They were not reporting it. They were not reporting those kinds of things. They had never once reported anybody sexually harming any of their kids, even if it was just a random person. They would never report that, and of course they
Mm.
wouldn't report themselves doing it. So early on, and obviously alongside that, my other sibling, who is a victim of all of this too, is a year younger than him. So they were born within, I think, a year or two within each other's age. So it would look like, in my opinion, that simultaneously a lot of things were happening to them kind of at the same time. But he did perpetrate as young as I can remember sexual abuse. So early on,
Mm.
what happened to him and how he dealt with it, and the compulsivity he was forcing onto everyone else, the abuse, and
Mm.
it was not out of. I would feel like it could be appropriate to say there would be a reason why a child could react that way, but the way it went on is not something I can even explain as COCSA because that is just such a light, and I wouldn't even say
Mm.
light, but that just doesn't encompass what he began to do at a very young age. He was an abuser, sexual abuser from a very extremely young age. I don't entirely know, but I remember from the time I was born, he was at least like 9, 10 when he started harming me as a toddler. So
Mm.
that means when the other siblings were previous, everything was happening to them. And I do have accounts from my own siblings that and memories of being told that it did happen before and that my
Mm.
parents were allowing, harming, and definitely, but I just don't know,
Encouraging.
sexually
Mm.
abusing and encouraging sexual abuse. So my brother
Mm.
was the initial first child. He was groomed and definitely forced to display these behaviors and allow them and be okay with them. But
Mm.
eventually there was an understanding that everybody knew this was not okay, except for maybe we did know the victims, like the children.
Mm.
And in that situation, we were all victims, but there were siblings perpetrating against other siblings, and that was what he was. Him and my other older brother, who comes right, the third child.
Mm.
First and third were literally, yes, the most abusive. It was not just a product of his environment, and I would not like that to be put as like a forefront of me explaining him.
Mm.
So with my thoughts right now, I do view it in that aspect of like he was a learned behavior and a coddled and allowed. But first and foremost, in my opinion, and in my feelings about what I went through with what he put me through, is that he chose a lot of it.
Man, that's really messed up. I
Yeah.
remember earlier you mentioned that you disassociate. Did this
Yes.
disassociating happen at around that time? Was that your way of coping when you were in these
Yeah.
situations to just sort of block it
Yeah.
out?
That's why I felt like I had a very high mask on because of also not knowing I was autistic. I was diagnosed with autism at a very young age, but my mom refused to do anything about that. She
Anything.
hid it from me actually and wanted me to be, she told me she wanted me to be normal and to not know I was autistic because she didn't want to affect me, which is wrong, and that is wrong. I was
Mm.
nonverbal for a long time in my life, and I still struggle with everything I struggled with as a child. I am, you know,
disabled. Alongside that, they were just like, it made me dissociate. I feel like from birth, I feel like the moment I was born, alongside the fact that I was born at 26 weeks, extremely premature, and in foster care during infancy, immediately after, and then put back with my parents, and then sexually abused as young as 2 years old, immediately. Immediately. I don't doubt that my baby infant self was dissociating from the get-go. That's how I coped. I was always the very extroverted, happy child of the family, and when I was at school, people would say that I always had such an optimistic spirit, and they would never have known. And now that I've said my story, people say, "Are you sure? Like, I didn't see that. Like, what do you mean that happened to you? Because you looked so normal." And there's pictures of me from my whole childhood. I took so many pictures as a kid. I love taking pictures, and it looks happy. But if you look in between all the pictures, the posts in between that are still up from 2009 to 2018, there is proof. There's literal physical evidence proof. Pictures of like physical abuse, and I was calling it something else. Oh, I sprained my wrist today, guys. My ankle's been sprained a lot. I pulled my medical documents as a child, as I got an adult, from childhood. Chronic unknown sprains in ankles, chronic unknown sprains in wrists, chronic headaches and contortions and neck soreness from being beat, and chronic UTIs and bacterial infections in my genital region, like getting infections from the sexual abuse and being abused. And I grew up with so many different things going on, too many health conditions and diseases. My parents let us just get exposed to everything. Like, so yeah, dissociation. I had to dissociate from illness and violence and daily life. So I didn't look dissociated by most people. If I went back and asked everybody, did I look like a dissociated person? And what they know of dissociation, they're going to say, no, no, you were very active. You were very extroverted and loud as a teenager. You were a very happy looking teenager.
Right.
And that is very interesting.
So in therapy, is this something that you've been diagnosed with, like DID, dissociative identity disorder? Like, is this something you're being treated for? Have you recognized, other, what they call them, personalities that exist? Or did disassociation look a little bit different for you?
So early on, I do feel like that is something I'm leaning into. I've already been discussing it in therapy, that there is a dissociative factor of my entire life, and that a dissociative alteration of my personality is definitely something that could have happened. Mine would be on a different, I'd say, display, for lack of a better word. Like, it appears different. That's why I probably wouldn't have known. And when you find out about dissociation, it's typically after you realize you've been dissociating the whole time. And it's kind of like that was dissociation. I thought that was just like normal. So when I found that out, which was just in the recent years, that I just was dissociating the whole time, is that I definitely have some kind of alteration from the trauma, some kind of disconnection. I don't have any diagnosis of a dissociative disorder, but for now I have a diagnosis of a plethora of conditions that my doctor, psychiatrist, and therapist agree that if we don't know entirely, because of how complex my brain is and my symptoms, what it would be called, we are treating the symptoms of the fact that I am in and out of dissociation. I have amnesia and blackouts. I have full forgetfulness of key factors of my life and details constantly. And that is just something that, even if it doesn't get diagnosed, I'm diagnosed with dissociation as a pattern and a reoccurrent symptom.
Can you tell me sort of like how debilitating is this in your life today? I mean, how much does it affect your day-to-day life now, now that you're away from it and out of it?
Well, I'd say it affected me up until forever, but the causes of it, the effects, the after effects. After moving, I did not technically escape abuse, unfortunately. And if I'm being honest, I actually just escaped abuse in last December. And that was after reoccurrent abuse went on from various households that I was being re-victimized in after moving because of fleeing and not having resources and being a child. I ended up re-victimized for the last, all the years I was escaped. So up until last December, I was in situations back to back where I was being victimized again. So unfortunately, I can say it affected me in a way where I was not free from the way it made me be and surround people with myself, or surround people around myself with. And it wasn't.
Were these
like,
usually like
re-victimization.
relationships that you were getting into,
Friendships,
or
yeah,
like
friendships.
friendships?
No, I've been actually with the same partner since I was in the abuse with my family. I've been with them since I was 16. So and I've known them since I was 14. So
they have been with me through it all. I actually have not been in very many relationships since, because I've like thought of dating out, and that has gotten me in a lot of areas where I have to make boundaries. And after fleeing from it, I do realize a lot of stuff was not my fault, but I was just so unaware of the naivety I had and the way I allowed people to do things to me and forgave them constantly. And it
Mm,
definitely wasn't, me choosing that, but I was abused over and over. And I just thought that maybe that was something that was just supposed to happen because just like
mm.
in childhood, it's happening, it's comfortable, and it's normal. And anything outside of it is really freaking freaky.
Yeah,
So
that
up
makes sense.
until now, actually, I'm actually feeling very weird knowing that I'm free from any kind of abuse in
Mm.
that aspect because I would say now at the age of 24, this is the first time I've been free from that entirely. So 24 years of my life almost were I was being consistently abused by various
Mm.
people.
What about like in other ways? Have you noticed like sort of certain trauma responses or ways that you maybe unknowingly are reacting or responding to things, communicating with
Yeah,
people, pulling your relationship now, like carrying your
yeah,
relationship now, where you're bringing in things from there? Why I ask this is because like I feel like for listeners, this could be something that could bring to their awareness if they've gone through some kind of trauma in the past and maybe not aware of certain behaviors that they're exhibiting now. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that.
yeah. So obviously, my childhood, I had a lot of behaviors displayed like that, like in reaction to the trauma. From here, my reactions over the last few years have been the same as I feel now. I've gotten more coordinated with it, but I feel like I have physical reactions to the trauma. I have neurological and mental and everything. I have a sensory reaction. I have phobias because of this. I have so many mental health conditions that they don't even know. They don't even know, and they diagnose me with so many that they don't know which ones are which. And I have disabilities and brain damage from this. So that is the baseline. And then the way I've reacted with it physically and mentally, like outwardly, and people can see even, is I scream a lot at myself. I hit myself a lot throughout my childhood. And as an adult, I would hit myself because that was just the only thing that was regulating. I would hit myself. I've never really been a violent type, but hitting myself as an autistic person was the way out. I hit myself and I scream. I cry. I am so dysregulated that any minor sensory change in day to day, and this is still continuing now, will set me off in like a trigger. Everything is trauma based. So I could say things like, that made me realize I was very, very traumatized was that I'm triggered by everything. Everything. And I mean everything. Like, if you think of things as simple as laying in a bed, I'm triggered by that. I don't like laying in beds. I actually sleep on the floor sometimes and lay on a blanket. I prefer that. I don't like laying on pillows because there's trauma with pillows. I don't like pulling a blanket over me, and I don't like having blankets tucked or loose on me. I don't like certain clothing, and I don't like clothing at all, but I hate being naked. It is triggering
Mm,
to live, and I am traumatized actually daily by remembering it. And that is the hardest part, is that every day I wake up and remember that, like, that is what I dealt with. And it does get worse, and I feel like I go backwards a little bit every now and then because I do
mm,
think very hard on it. But it is a constant thing. It is a daily, from the moment I wake up, my sleep is not good. I don't sleep, and I'm disturbed in my sleep. I have night terrors and nightmares. I am constantly dysregulated. I cry out random, and I am in therapy, and I'm on medication. So these things are just literally purely a response of the trauma. I am working on things, and it is still that heavy. I get so dysregulated that even as of recent, I will get so dysregulated in public because of the trigger with my agoraphobia and my androphobia, which is a fear of men. I have a fear of men and anybody who looks male, and that is unfortunate because I don't want to push that onto anybody or have that reaction
mm,
around anybody. But that's why I stay inside for the most part, because going outside, any person who could look or sound like anybody who could have hurt me, which was so many men who looked so many different ways, and I'm talking about more than 100 people who were specifically men have abused me, more, and it was thousands of instances of sexual abuse. So when I go outside, my first thought and expectation when I leave my house is, I expect and prepare to be sexually abused today and every day and any day
mm.
after.
Yeah. Do you feel like your partner really helps in this for you? Having
Yes,
someone that you can trust a little bit helps a little bit?
yes. We went through so much simultaneous stuff together in the last few years, and they were there when I was a child. They were actually the first person I ever told when I was a child. When I was 15, I decided to finally tell someone, and it was them. I told them
that I was being abused by my brothers. And I had never told anybody else, and I did not open up about that. So they are a safe space with that, and they've always been. I've never been able to share such details with someone about things and they not be uncomfortable and run away and not want to be my friend anymore because they realize I have been through things that they only see in movies and they think are inhumane, that are so inhumane that they are only in movies. That does not happen and they're not going to think about that. So yes,
And in
so
what way
my
do you feel
partner is
like
just
you're,
really the
yeah, yeah. In what way do you feel like your partner has been able to sort of like support you when you're feeling really triggered or you're feeling really anxious in a specific moment? Can you give me any instance where you were feeling particularly triggered, or maybe you're having a discussion with your partner and you're like, I'm feeling really, really
yeah.
triggered right now? How do they respond and
Yeah.
how do they help you through it?
That is like a daily, obviously. Just like the other day, I can use an example. I was commenting on a post that was sharing awareness for COCSA, and I experienced that, so I commented on it, and I was like relating to someone else's comment, and someone replied and did a bunch of laughing emojis and was laughing at my experience, and I told my partner about it, and they were quick to just be like defense and like, are you okay? And there for me and asking like questions. And I obviously was dissociating again and very quiet. I think I went to the bathroom and was very sad. And I start to get overheated and argumentative and irritated when I get this way because I'm like, I don't want anyone near me. I don't want anything right now. I don't like anything. So, and it's hard for, I'm even sure for anyone to see that happening to me and not know why it's happening because I don't really plainly say the trigger. So when these triggers happen, sometimes they don't even know what's going on. And they are just there, and sometimes I'm just quiet and I won't say anything. And that is just over time, I guess it's just become a thing that only they can really handle because I've tried doing that around my friends, like, having not an intense reaction, but just being very dissociated and lost and not being able to respond. And no one's able to handle that. So I feel like they're at an area that can help me more than most people.
Have you ever reported your parents and your brother to the
No.
police? Is that something you
Um,
plan on doing?
Probably not. The way I don't even have full memories with everything yet, and the amount of memories I have, um, which is hundreds, would still only be less than like 1% of anything.
I just want to talk or just touch on one last thing before we end the interview today, which is like a little bit about the therapy that you're seeking. What was some of the kinds of therapy that you started to seek? How did you begin that process or that journey of like, okay, I need to start seeing a therapy. I need to start working on my healing. I need to start getting medication for this. What triggered that? What helped you to get that ball rolling, and what kind of therapies have you seen thereafter?
So as a teenager, I had one therapist that I was allowed to see through a certain counseling service because I had attempted to harm myself and kill myself, unfortunately. And I was put in that counseling. I really didn't really benefit from it, but that gave me like an ounce, like a little spark of like understanding that even though I couldn't tell this therapist what was going on because I would not, and I would lie, that was something that I could look into one day, that maybe the feeling she was giving me could be elevated if I told the truth. So it took a few more years after being in my house, escaping, and then establishing and learning how to be an adult. Around 19 and 20, I started to get into some therapy. I would just get normal counseling, and it really didn't benefit me. I never really got anything technical. They just kept putting me in inpatients, and that is wanting to let people know that that's not what they're supposed to do. Inpatient facilities back to back to back to back, and no outpatient, no therapy, no partial hospitalizations, no care further, no case management with people with this kind of trauma, no like people like county
Follow
aides.
up.
Like seriously, these people need this kind of stuff. So I took a while to access therapy. I have not had consistent therapy at all, and I have had just little bits here and there for the last 6 years. Only now, this August, have I started actual, true trauma therapy with a trauma therapist. So it is this year.
What is trauma therapy? How does that work? Is there any like
So
hypnotherapy involved in this as well? Like, are they asking
I
you?
think she does use hypnotic features. I don't think it's like a hypnosis, but hypnotic
Okay.
features. She uses a very certain approach. I forget what she calls it. It is talk therapy, definitely, but she uses certain approaches that just feel like I like a conversation, and I like to not be told what my coping mechanisms need to be and how I need to be
Mm,
automatically. I
yeah.
like to be told blatantly what I need, but every therapist I go to is already aware that I am self-aware and I know everything I need and I know everything I've already needed and I know what will get me to the right spot. I just
Right.
can't articulate it. Yeah, trauma therapy for me is currently, and for anybody else, it would typically be pinpointing more counseling towards the trauma aspect. I feel like the root, Like it bases in the root, because I've been to other therapy and other counseling, and they try to touch on the mental health disorders as themselves and the current
Hmm.
symptoms at hand. And when I would try to express on these things that were deeper, it wasn't going anywhere because these people are not qualified as a trauma therapist is. And I spoke with a temp therapist previously a few months ago that told me that I did need a trauma therapist, and I got recommended one because she had said that my level of abuse and my level of care needed with this kind of therapy is the level of abuse that she experienced, she witnessed from victims that she worked with that were coming from war exploitation and war trafficking. She told me that, and I was like, wow, that maybe she's just, exaggerating. I really thought that maybe I'm just, no, it can't be that bad. And I asked my sibling, I said, this is weird, but has anyone ever said this kind of thing to you, like a therapist? And they said yes. So yes, I was evaluated and then found to have such profound and extreme trauma that trauma therapy is the only route with this. And yeah, it basically touches in the root of trauma and bases everything from there. So instead of touching on like a coping mechanism for the day, or like a homework for the day, or like coping mechanisms of how I'm going to get better and what I'm going to look forward to and like what I'm grateful for, that cannot work when there was nothing to be grateful for. So they do not touch like on things like that. So for mine, I love how it's just a day. Like I get to express the main things and I don't have to go too in depth unless I want to, and it gets circled back around into the right area, and I don't get to be triggered, and I don't spill all of it, because trauma therapists are also supposed to let you talk, but they are not supposed to let you keep talking into a hole of triggering yourself and then going home and being completely dysregulated and probably never going back to therapy. That happened to me a few times. So my trauma therapist is amazing because she literally is just helping me understand that I can talk about it and then rope back into a regular, regulated feeling after the appointment, before the appointment, and before I go home. Then when I'm home, I thought about all of that. That was awful. But here I am, and I'm regulated because I didn't have to think about it and then not have any resources after.
Right. And one thing I really like about that as well is like it's kind of taking away this element of like, I am here right now. I need to be here by the end of like these many sessions. And then it kind of becomes very focused on that final end result, that final goal. And, a lot of people end up feeling really disappointed if they haven't reached that goal by the end of that time period. But, the truth is like mental health does not work that way, especially if you're trying to undo something that was really difficult for you. It just does not work that way. There's no time limit for it. And it may not quite happen in that direction or in that way. And so a lot of people, they kind of go into therapy thinking like, I need to be here by this point, and that's just not the way it is. So it's good that she's kind of just sitting with you. Right.
Yep. I was doing that to myself a lot because before I thought I had to be at a certain level by now. I was like, well, I'm 20, I'm 22, I'm 23, I'm 24 now. And I was like, why am I not better by now? What the heck is wrong with me?
Yeah.
And it's because I was building off the ideology that every day I needed to be like completely better and show progress in that like ultimate better way, like be better when I could I just not just be there for a second? Could I just not just be and it be like that and it be allowed to be awful and allowed to be suffering and me not have to work on anything? Can I just talk about it? Can I just understand and be aware and not have anybody tell me how to deal with it and what I need to do make it better whenever I had no resources? So that's what I appreciate out of my trauma therapy with her, is that I'm not expected to be the best every second.
Wow. So, I mean, that's a really, really intense story. I really do appreciate you sharing this with us and, also getting it sort of out there on different platforms as well. I don't know whether this is something that is healing for you, but I do hope that this interview to an extent has kind of been, and at least that I've given you somewhat of a safe space to sort of feel comfortable with me. But I really appreciate you being here on air with us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate actually being on, and I really appreciate like you messaging me. I felt really like nice because I had someone message me previously about the podcast. I actually have always wanted to do this, even though I'm not articulate as much as I want to be, and I probably didn't say as much as I wanted to say in the right ways. But I feel like I said what I felt like would be good to say, that I want anybody to hear that I went through when I share, my story. And I really appreciate you like taking the time.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Lucas Piri,
Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.